I'm not sure why I decided to go camping alone that fall. It wasn't like I was an experienced outdoorsman or anything. I worked an office job, spent most of my days staring at a computer, and only occasionally went for hikes or short weekend trips. But I was feeling burned out. Work had been stressful. My personal life was a mess, and I just wanted to get away. A coworker had told me about a quiet area in the hills, a little state forest that didn't get many visitors. There weren't official campgrounds, but dispersed camping was allowed. You just had to hike in, set up away from trails, and pack everything out when you left. That sounded like what I needed: total quiet, no people, no obligations. I packed light: a small one-person tent, sleeping bag, camp stove, basic food, and some warm clothes. It was early October, cool but not yet cold. I checked the weather, no storms in sight, and drove out after work on a Friday. By the time I reached the gravel pull-off at the edge of the forest, the sun was dipping low. I didn't want to hike too far in the dark, so I picked a spot maybe 40 minutes walk from the car. I veered off the faint trail, found a flat clearing under a big oak tree, and set up camp. It was peaceful. Birds called in the distance, leaves rustled softly in the breeze, and there was the faint smell of damp earth and pine. I made a simple dinner, just instant noodles on the little stove, and sat on a log watching the stars come out. I remember thinking how quiet it was. No cars, no voices, no background hum of machines. Just wind, the occasional creak of trees, and my own breath. That night, I slept hard, wrapped up snug in my sleeping bag. The next morning, I decided to explore. There was no marked trail near where I camped, so I just wandered. The forest was thick but walkable, with big trees spaced out and soft leaf litter underfoot. I saw deer tracks, a few squirrels, even a fox at one point. It darted off before I could really get a good look. After a couple of hours, I found something strange. In a shallow dip between two ridges, half hidden under brush, was an old fire ring. Blackened stones in a rough circle with some charred wood inside. That wasn't so weird by itself. People camped out here sometimes. But next to the fire ring was a large plastic water jug, crushed and dirty, and a rolled-up sleeping bag, moldy and torn. It looked like someone had abandoned their gear. I poked around a little, curious. There was no food, no backpack, no sign of anyone nearby. Just the remains of an old camp. I guessed it had been there a while, maybe a season or two, judging by the mold. I didn't like the feeling of the place, though. Something about the way the gear was left, the way the area was half hidden, gave me a weird sense of unease. I headed back to my own campsite, walking faster than before. That night, as I lay in my tent, I kept thinking about that old campsite. Who had been there? Why had they left their stuff? Was someone still out here? I told myself to stop overthinking. I was alone. I had seen no one. There was no reason to worry. But around midnight, I woke up. First, I didn't know why. Then I heard it, a faint snapping sound, like a branch breaking, not far from my tent. I lay completely still, heart pounding. My mind raced. Could be a deer, I told myself, or a raccoon, but it could also be a person. I stayed frozen for a long time, straining to hear. The snapping sound didn't come again. After what felt like an hour, I finally drifted back into a light, uneasy sleep. The next morning, I was jumpy. I packed up some of my gear, just in case, and decided to hike a little farther, maybe find a new spot to camp for the night. As I walked, I kept looking over my shoulder. I didn't see anyone. The woods were empty. But when I got back to the old abandoned campsite, I noticed something that made my stomach turn. The crushed plastic jug was gone. I stood there for a long minute, heart thudding, looking around. Who had taken it? And why? There were no fresh footprints, no sign of anyone passing through. But the jug was definitely gone. I'd seen it the day before, half buried under some leaves. Now it was just gone. I decided then and there I wasn't going to stay another night. I hiked back to my camp, packed up everything quickly, and started making my way toward the car. I moved fast, barely stopping to drink water, eyes darting left and right as I walked. About halfway back, I stopped dead in my tracks. There, hanging from a low branch right across the trail, was the crushed plastic jug. Someone had tied it to the branch with a piece of old rope, dangling it right where I'd have to pass under. I felt a wave of cold panic wash over me. This wasn't random. Someone knew I was here. Someone had been watching me. I took a deep breath, stepped around the hanging jug, and kept walking. I forced myself not to run. I didn't want to trip or get lost. I just kept moving, steady and fast, all the way back to the car. When I finally reached the gravel pull-off, I saw something else that made my blood run cold. On the hood of my car, someone had set a small pile of stones. 5 or 6 flat stones stacked neatly in a little tower. I hadn't put them there. No one else was supposed to be out here. I didn't waste time. I unlocked the car, threw my pack in the back, and got in, locking the doors immediately. My hands were shaking so badly I fumbled the keys twice before getting them into the ignition. I drove away fast, glancing in the rearview mirror over and over. I didn't see anyone on the road, didn't see anyone in the trees, but I knew with a deep, crawling certainty that someone had been there, watching me the whole time. I didn't stop until I reached a small town an hour away. I pulled into a gas station, sat in the lot, and just breathed for a while, trying to calm down. I never reported it to the police. What would I say? That someone moved a jug and stacked some rocks? There was no real crime, nothing concrete, just a series of small, terrifying signs. But I never went back to that forest, and I never camped alone again. Even now, years later, I still wonder about it. Who was out there? Why were they watching me? And what would have happened if I'd stayed just one more night? I don't think I want to know. I haven't gone camping or even out into the woods at night since this trip, and I don't think I ever will again. It was supposed to be just a fun weekend away. We had a 5-day break from school. Me, my best friend, I'll call him Nate, and 3 other friends, 2 girls and another guy. Nate and I were the most experienced outdoors. He was an Army veteran, and I'd gone hunting and camping with my dad a few times growing up. We knew how to prepare, so when we all decided on this North Georgia camping trip, we went all out. We brought a 10-person tent even though there were just 5 of us, packed food, water, cots, sleeping bags, propane stove, a little shower bag, everything you could think of. Nate even brought a small hatchet and a big camping knife. I had a handgun with me, and so did Nate. In Kennesaw, it's normal, and besides, we were going to be deep in the woods. Better safe than sorry. We left on Wednesday afternoon, driving up into the mountains. We parked in a small town and loaded up our packs, leaving the truck in a lot behind a general store. From there, it was about a 5-mile hike into the woods. The trail was well worn at first, but as we got farther, it narrowed and faded. Still, it was a normal, peaceful hike. We were laughing, talking, hauling gear, and just enjoying being away from town. We first noticed something strange after about 4 or 5 miles. We'd come into a wide clearing with a pond or maybe a small lake right in the center. We all stepped into the clearing, and it was like the whole world held its breath. No birds chirping, no wind moving through the trees, no bugs buzzing in the grass. I could even hear my own breath, loud in my ears. Nate gave me a look. I knew what he was thinking: predator. Maybe a mountain lion, maybe coyotes, maybe a bear, though I'd never seen one in Georgia. We both quietly pulled our handguns, just in case, and scanned the tree line. Then Nate tensed and gave me a slight nudge. I followed his eyes across the pond, where I saw a woman standing just at the edge of the trees. She was far off, maybe 150 yards, and I could barely make her out. She was tall, thin, wearing dark clothes. She wasn't moving, just standing there, facing our direction. We figured maybe she lived nearby. Maybe there was a little cabin or homestead we hadn't noticed. So, after a few moments, we continued on, crossing past the pond and heading back into the woods. I remember glancing back once we were among the trees. She was gone. Once we were in the cover of the forest again, the sounds of the world returned. Birds calling, wind in the branches, insects in the grass. We kept hiking for another couple of miles. It was getting late, and we didn't want to be setting up camp in the dark, so we found a decent spot. A small clearing, mostly flat, with enough space for our big tent and a fire pit. We unpacked, set up everything, and got a fire going. We made dinner, cracked open some beers, and relaxed. I'd been casually flirting with one of the girls for a few weeks, and that night we snuck off under the excuse of fixing part of the tent. We fooled around for a while, laughing quietly, but after a few minutes, she stopped. I noticed the change almost immediately, the silence. Suddenly, it was dead quiet again. No wind, no bugs, no birds. We both dressed quickly and went back to the fire. The others were still talking, joking, and they hadn't noticed anything strange. We didn't mention it, just sat down and tried to shake the weird feeling. The next morning, something odd happened. The propane stove, which no one had used that night, was turned on, fully open, but the burner wasn't lit. The propane had run out overnight. We all assumed one of us must have left it open by mistake. Accidents happen, but it nagged at me. Nate looked uneasy too, though neither of us said much. On the second morning, some things were missing. A lantern we'd left by the fire was gone, and the girl's sweatshirt, the one I'd been with, was missing from where she'd left it on a camp chair. We spent the day hiking upstream along the river, looking for a waterfall Nate had read about online. The woods were beautiful, peaceful, and for a while we all relaxed again. Then it happened again. The silence. We were walking along a narrow trail when Nate nudged me sharply. He didn't say anything, just pointed up the hillside next to us. Through the trees, I could just barely see her. The same woman, same dark clothes, standing still. She wasn't moving, just there, watching. Couldn't tell. Nate told the group he thought there was a mountain lion following us and that he was going to scare it off. He headed up the hill, making loud noises, crashing through the underbrush. 10 minutes later, he came back, saying he'd scared it off. But when we were out of earshot of the others, he told me quietly, "She wasn't there when I got up there." We found the waterfall eventually. The girls went skinny dipping in the river, laughing, splashing, and for a while the tension eased. But when we got back to camp that evening, we found a mess. It wasn't like an animal had ransacked the site. No torn food bags, no tracks, no damage. But things had clearly been moved. Our packs were unzipped. The firewood was scattered. Someone had rifled through the cooler but left everything inside. Nate and I both kept our guns close that night. That night was the worst. I woke up to the girl squeezing my arm. I opened my eyes, about to ask what was wrong, but she pressed a finger to her lips, eyes wide. I listened. Nothing. No crickets, no wind, no rustling trees. Just deep, heavy silence. Across the tent, I could see Nate sitting halfway up, wide-eyed, his hand resting on his gun. None of us slept much the rest of the night. We lay there, ears straining, hearts racing, waiting for something, anything to happen. When dawn finally came, we packed up fast. Nobody spoke much. We just wanted to get out. The hike back took half the time it had taken to get in. We were moving fast, barely stopping, trying not to look over our shoulders too much. I thought I saw the woman a few more times, just barely, through the trees. But I didn't stop. I just kept walking. We avoided the pond completely, swinging wide around it, and got back to the truck by early afternoon. Once we were safely on the road, everyone started opening up. Turns out all of us had seen or heard the woman over the weekend. Small things. A glimpse through the trees, a flicker of movement near the tents, the sound of footsteps outside at night. The strange part was, none of us could describe her face. It was like it was blurry, or we just hadn't been able to focus on it. We remembered the dark clothes, the long hair, the way she stood perfectly still. But her face? Nothing. I don't know who she was. Maybe someone living out there off the grid. Maybe a squatter, maybe someone with mental health issues, maybe just someone who didn't want people in her woods. But we all felt the same thing, we weren't wanted there. It wasn't like a ghost story. No glowing eyes or shadowy figures or strange voices. It was worse in a way because it was real. There was someone out there watching us, moving our things, turning on the stove, standing just close enough to be seen but never approaching. We never went back. None of us have gone camping since. Even now, years later, I get chills thinking about it. When I'm out walking at night or when I hear the wind go still and the world fall quiet, I sometimes feel like she's there, just on the edge of my vision, just waiting, watching. And I know I'll never set foot in those woods again. I'm not sure why I thought it was a good idea to go camping by myself that summer. I'd been working hard, too many hours at a desk, and I wanted to get away from everything. People, noise, screens. I just wanted trees, dirt, wind, and space. North Central Pennsylvania is one of those places where you can find real quiet, the kind that fills your head and feels heavier than any noise. I planned it out for a while, picked a national forest area, studied the maps, and marked out a long Forest Service road that wound into the middle of nowhere. There were no formal campgrounds where I was going, no maintained trails, just old logging roads and faded footpaths. I loaded my pack with all the gear I'd need: tent, sleeping bag, food, water purifier, a small camp stove, knife, first aid kit, rain jacket, flashlight, spare batteries, rope, everything I could think of. I figured I'd drive in, park, and then hike in maybe 5 or 6 miles until I found a good flat spot near water. I'd spend the night, maybe 2, and just let my brain unwind. The drive was rougher than I expected. I'd planned for dirt roads, but not for how narrow they'd be. The road felt like it hadn't been driven in months, maybe longer. Grass grew down the middle, small branches hung low, brushing the sides of my car as I crept along. I drove for over an hour like that, bouncing in my seat, feeling more and more like I was pushing too far. I kept thinking maybe I should just stop and hike from here, but every time I thought that, I told myself no, just a little farther, the trailhead is marked farther in. When I finally reached the place where the old trail branched off, it was barely recognizable. The trailhead sign was so weathered the letters were almost gone. The narrow path curved away into the trees, half swallowed by ferns and brush. I parked the car, got out, stretched my legs, and just stood there for a minute, listening. No traffic sounds, no planes overhead, no voices, no dogs barking in the distance. Just wind in the trees and a faint creak somewhere below. I slung on my pack and started walking. The hike was harder than I expected. The path was overgrown, with no sign anyone had come through recently. I broke spiderweb after spiderweb with my face and arms. Branches scraped at my clothes, ferns tugged at my boots. The trail followed the curve of a shallow valley, with a creek down below. I figured if I stuck with the creek, I wouldn't get lost, but even then, it was tough going. The trail was rocky and uneven, sloping up and down with little clear space. I walked for hours, longer than I meant to, because every time I thought maybe I should stop and set up camp, I'd look around and see nothing but steep, uneven ground. I didn't want to sleep on a slope or in thick brush. I kept hoping for a flat clearing. By the time the sun started dipping low, I was starting to feel nervous. It would be dark soon, and I didn't want to set up in the dark. That's when I came upon the fork in the creek. The trail led me right to it, where 2 small branches of the creek split apart, and on the other side, I saw what looked like the perfect spot. A flat patch of ground just above the waterline, open enough for a tent, shaded by a couple big trees. I waded across the shallow water, boots slipping on the rocks, and as I stepped onto the bank, I froze. There was stuff scattered everywhere. At first, I thought maybe it was just old trash, but then I looked closer. There was a tarp stretched on the ground near a stone fire ring. A log, about a foot thick, had been chopped neatly with an axe. A little ways off, there was a pile of camping gear, food wrappers, a cooking set, a foam sleeping pad, a first aid kit, all dumped out across the dirt like someone had just appended their whole backpack. But I didn't see the backpack. Down by the edge of the creek, there was a soggy pile of clothes, crumpled like someone had left them there and walked away. Nearby, a towel hung from a low branch, stiff and stained. The strangest thing, though, was the wooden structure. About 15 feet away from the fire ring, someone had built a frame, maybe 4 feet tall and 4 feet wide, shaped like a cube, out of long saplings tied together. Each face of the cube had diagonal crossbars. It wasn't solid, there were big gaps between the branches, and it didn't look sturdy. It wasn't a trap or a cage, not really. It wouldn't hold anything in or keep anything out. It just stood there, almost like it was for show. I stood there a long time, just staring at all of it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It was nearly dark. I didn't have much choice but to stay. Hiking back in the dark on a barely there trail would be asking for trouble. I decided to set up my tent on the far side of the clearing, near a thick clump of trees. I kept my big knife in my hand the whole time I worked, eyes darting at every sound, skin prickling at every rustle of wind. I set up fast, tent, sleeping bag, water bottle, flashlight within reach. I didn't cook dinner. I just ate a couple protein bars and drank water. As soon as the sun was fully down, the place changed. It was quiet before, but now it was dead silent. No insects, no water sounds, no night birds, nothing. Just a heavy, crushing quiet. I sat inside my tent with the knife in my hand, listening, straining to hear anything. I kept imagining footsteps outside, or the sound of something brushing past the wooden frame, or something splashing in the creek. But every time I held my breath to listen, there was nothing. I barely slept. Every time I drifted off, I jolted awake again, convinced I'd heard something. Hours crawled by. The walls of the tent felt paper thin. I kept imagining some figure stepping into the clearing, standing over the pile of clothes, or crouching by the fire ring, or leaning against that weird wooden frame. I imagined someone or something watching me from the trees, waiting. I told myself over and over, it's fine. There's no one out here, it's just old gear left behind. Maybe some hiker abandoned camp in a rush. But the uneasiness stayed. Finally, the sky started to lighten. I sat up, stretched, and started packing immediately. My hands shook as I shoved everything into my pack. I wanted to get out as fast as possible. On the hike back, the silence followed me. I kept looking over my shoulder, feeling like I wasn't alone. The trail was just as overgrown, just as empty, but it felt different now. Every shadow between the trees looked like someone standing there. Every gust of wind sounded like whispering. When I finally reached my car, I tossed my gear into the back and drove without stopping. The rough dirt road didn't feel so bad now. I was just glad to be moving, to be leaving that place behind. When I got home, I couldn't stop thinking about that sight, about the gear scattered on the ground, the wet clothes, the wooden frame. It didn't make sense. If someone had just been camping, why leave all that behind? Why build that weird structure? Why abandon everything? I called the local Forest Service office. I explained what I'd found, described the spot, and even emailed them the pictures I'd taken on my phone. The ranger I spoke to was polite but not too concerned. He said it was probably someone squatting in the woods, or maybe an old moonshine still, or just a loner living out there. They'd send someone to check it out. I never followed up to see if they did. In the months since, I've kept thinking about it. I've gone over it in my mind, trying to fit the pieces together. Who left that camp? Why leave so much behind? Why build that strange, useless cage? I've camped since then, but never that deep, never that isolated. I stay on marked trails now, near other hikers, near roads. I still love the woods, but something about that trip rattled me. And I never figured out what that cage was for. Maybe I never will, but I know this. I'll never camp that far out alone again. Not ever. I've always been drawn to the outdoors. Not because I'm some hardcore adventurer or mountain man. Honestly, I'm pretty average, but I like the peace it gives me. I like the smell of trees, the quiet, the long trails where no one bothers you. Back when I was at James Madison University, that feeling was something I craved even more because life was constantly moving. Papers, deadlines, work shifts. So when my buddy Mike suggested we head out to Shenandoah National Park to watch the Perseid meteor shower, I was all in. We both worked campus jobs that summer, mostly boring maintenance and light gear rentals. We had easy access to good camping equipment, and Mike came to me one afternoon saying, "Hey, let's get out there for the weekend. Watch the meteors, clear our heads." Sounded perfect. We threw together our stuff. I grabbed my two-person tent. He had a hammock set up with a rain tarp. We packed light, sleeping bags, some food, snacks, water, headlamps, a small camping stove. It wasn't going to be a long trip. We just needed to hike in far enough to get away from the roads and find a dark spot to watch the sky. We drove out Friday afternoon. It was a warm August day, blue skies, light breeze. The roads were quiet once we got into the park, winding through the dense woods and rising hills. We parked at a small trailhead, checked our packs, and started walking. The trail we picked was an out-and-back route, meaning it didn't loop, It just went in until it ended. And the end point? A cliff edge overlooking the Blue Ridge Mountains. We figured it was the perfect spot. No light pollution, a wide open view of the sky, and hopefully no other hikers around to bother us. The hike itself was pretty easy at first. A little rocky in places, but nothing too rough. We passed through thick stretches of pine and hardwood forest, the kind where sunlight filters down in strips and the ground is layered with old pine needles. The deeper we got, the quieter it became. I remember noticing how still the air was, how the usual sounds of insects and birds seemed to thin out as we moved farther from the road. We hiked for maybe 2 hours, stopping now and then to drink water or adjust our packs. We didn't talk much, just the occasional "you good?" or "yeah, let's keep going." We were both eager to get there before dark so we could set up camp in daylight. When we finally reached the overlook, it was stunning. The rocky ledge jutted out over the valley, and from there, you could see layers of hills rolling away into the distance, blue and soft under the fading light. We both stood there for a while, taking it in. There was a quiet breeze that high up, rustling through the trees behind us. We set up camp just back from the cliff. I pitched my tent on a flat patch of ground, making sure to clear away any sharp rocks or sticks. Mike rigged his hammock between 2 sturdy trees, stringing the tarp above it just in case the weather turned. We made a quick dinner, nothing fancy, just some instant noodles and granola bars, and then settled on the cliff edge with our sleeping bags, ready to watch the meteors. The night sky was perfect, stars everywhere, pinpoints of light scattered across black velvet. And when the meteors started, it was like magic streaks of light flashing across the sky, some faint, some so bright they left glowing trails. We lay back on the rocks, silent, just watching, listening to the quiet night. We didn't stay out long, maybe an hour or 2, before we both got tired. I crawled into my tent, zipped up, and settled into my sleeping bag. Mike padded over to his hammock, and soon enough, the camp was silent except for the occasional rustle of wind in the trees. That's when the real part of this story begins. I don't know exactly what time it was when I woke up. My watch was buried somewhere in my pack, but if I had to guess, maybe 3 a.m. I woke up because I heard something. First, I thought it was rain, a light tapping sound, gentle, almost like drizzle. But when I really listened, I realized it wasn't hitting the tent the way rain would. It wasn't uniform. It was irregular, soft taps here and there, as if something small was touching the tent walls, brushing against the fabric. I lay there for several minutes, completely still, trying to figure it out. I could hear my own breathing loud in the small space. The tapping continued, steady but scattered, like something moving around the tent, or maybe several things. Finally, I reached for my flashlight. I kept it beside me, within arm's reach. My heart was pounding a little as I clicked it on and aimed the beam upwards, through the mesh top of my tent. That's when I saw them. Hundreds, no thousands, of centipedes. They were crawling all over the outside of the tent, swarming across the mesh, their legs writhing, their long bodies twisting and turning. Some were dropping down from the branches above, falling softly like little raindrops onto the top of the tent. Others were crawling up from the ground, massing along the sides. I could see their shapes in the flashlight beam, long and segmented, their antennae twitching as they searched, climbed, and spread. I felt frozen, like my body just locked up. I don't have a phobia of bugs or anything, but this wasn't just a few insects. This was a swarm, a thick, moving blanket of them, surrounding me on all sides. For what felt like hours, I just lay there, flashlight gripped in one hand, staring at the mesh ceiling, watching the centipedes crawl and fall and crawl again. Every now and then, one would drop down and land right on the tent roof, its shadow clear in the beam, legs scrabbling. I didn't sleep, not 1 second. At some point, I heard Mike snoring softly from his hammock, completely unaware of what was happening just a few feet away. I thought about calling out to him, but what was the point? If anything, he was better off not knowing. Besides, what could we even do? When dawn finally broke, the light creeping slowly through the trees, I felt like I'd aged 10 years. I unzipped the tent cautiously and stepped out, my legs shaky. The ground was littered with centipede bodies. Some were still alive, wriggling slowly through the pine needles, but most were dead, probably crushed by the sheer mass of the swarm or by falling from the branches and hitting the rocks below. I walked over to Mike's hammock. He was just waking up, stretching and yawning, completely unaware of what I'd been through. When he finally noticed the dead centipedes all around, his face twisted into a look of disgust. "What the hell?" he muttered, stepping carefully over the carcasses. We didn't waste much time. We packed up quickly, skipping breakfast, eager to get off that overlook and back to the car. As we hiked out, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see more of them creeping along the trail behind us. When we finally reached the car and started driving back, I remember sitting in the passenger seat, staring out the window, replaying the night in my head. I kept wondering how we hadn't seen any signs of them when we set up camp. No clusters on the trees, no carcasses on the ground, nothing. It was like they'd all emerged at once, just for that one night, swarming the campsite without warning. We never really figured out why it happened. Maybe it was the time of year, or maybe some strange cycle of nature we didn't understand. Maybe they were drawn to the warmth of the tent, or the smell of food, or the moisture in the ground. But whatever the reason, it stuck with me. Even now, years later, I still think about that night. I still remember the tapping sounds, the way the flashlight beam caught the shine of countless tiny legs, the weight of knowing that just a thin layer of fabric separated me from a living swarm. And while I still go camping sometimes, I've never, ever gone back to that overlook. I don't think I ever will, because some experiences stay with you, not because they were life-threatening or because they were filled with danger, but because they opened your eyes to just how strange and unsettling nature can be when you're alone in the dark, with no one but yourself to face it. And honestly, that's enough for me. It was the late 1980s and I was in my early 20s. At the time, I worked for the Park Service in Florida, and one of my close coworkers, Kim, worked alongside me. The two of us were both pretty outdoorsy people. We knew how to camp, how to set up a solid site, how to move through the woods without getting into trouble. For both of us, camping wasn't just recreation. It was part of our work, part of our lives. That summer, we decided to do a weekend camping trip in Central Florida. We had free access to several state parks because of our jobs, so it was an easy plan to make. Along with us, we brought another friend, Sarah, who wasn't part of the Park Service. And in fact, this was going to be her first real camping trip ever. Sarah was excited but also a little nervous. Not because she was scared of the outdoors, but because she didn't want to mess anything up. She kept asking little questions. How do we hang the food bags? What should she pack? Would there be snakes or bears? All the usual things first-time campers worry about. We arrived at the park on a Friday afternoon. We had chosen the youth camping area, which was separate from the main campsites. It was quieter, more isolated, and that weekend it was completely empty. The only people nearby were the rangers, who lived about a quarter-mile away in small service cabins. We liked the youth area because it gave us space. No other campers laughing around their fires or playing radios, no kids running around, just the three of us in the woods. We set up camp that afternoon. It was a hot, humid Florida day, the kind where the air feels heavy on your skin and the bugs start buzzing around your head the moment you stop moving. We found a good patch of ground under some tall pines and set up 2 tents, one for Kim and me, one for Sarah. We cleared the space, checked for ants, set up a little cooking area with a fire ring, and stacked our coolers nearby. That evening, we made a small dinner on the camp stove. Nothing fancy, just some canned chili, bread, and fruit. We sat around, enjoying the quiet. Sarah was getting into it, asking questions about the plants and animals around us, soaking in the sounds of the woods. I remember thinking it was nice to have someone so fresh to it, someone who saw the little things Kim and I had stopped noticing after years of working in parks. The first night was uneventful. We built a fire, talked for a while, and then all turned in. The night was full of the usual Florida sounds. Crickets, frogs, the occasional splash of something in the water nearby, the rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush. Nothing unusual. The next morning, we woke up early. The sun was hot, and the tents were already warming up like ovens. We had a lazy breakfast, then spent the day exploring some of the nearby trails. Kim and I showed Sarah how to read the markers, how to watch for signs of wildlife. We pointed out tracks, raccoons, deer, maybe even a bobcat, and stopped often to drink water. By late afternoon, we were back at camp, a little sweaty but relaxed, and we all split up a bit to do our own thing. I was collecting firewood. I remember that part clearly because it was one of those simple, repetitive tasks that lets your mind wander. I was off a little ways from camp, maybe just out of sight, gathering sticks and fallen branches. Every now and then, I'd stop, stand up straight, and just take in the quiet. It was during one of those moments that I first felt it. I'd be bending over, picking up a branch, and suddenly I'd feel like someone was watching me. I'd stop, straighten up, and look around. Nothing. No movement. No sound. Just the thick stillness of the woods. I'd shrug it off and keep working. But then it would come back. That feeling, like eyes on the back of my neck, like being watched by something just out of sight. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. Maybe I was just keyed up from the isolation, or maybe the presence of a first-time camper like Sarah made me feel more responsible, more alert. But as the afternoon wore on, the feeling stayed with me. I finished gathering wood and carried it back to camp, trying not to think too much about it. As the sun dipped lower, we started the bonfire. We wanted a good blaze for the evening, both for warmth and atmosphere. Not long after we got the fire going, one of the rangers who lived nearby showed up. He pulled up in a small park truck, brought us a load of firewood, and even cracked open a six-pack of beer. We all sat around the fire, talking, laughing, swapping stories. It was dark by then, the woods thick with shadow. We were deep into conversation when we heard distant sounds. Probably a group of teenagers messing around on one of the nearby trails. The trails were supposed to be closed at sunset, so the ranger and Kim decided to drive out and check on them, make sure they got back to their campsites. That left Sarah and me alone at the fire. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, just listening to the crackle of the flames, the occasional pop of sap in the wood. Sarah seemed relaxed, watching the firelight dance. I poked at the logs, adding a few more pieces, stretching out my legs. Then, all at once, I felt it. It was like a wave of cold washing over me, even though the air was still hot and sticky. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, my stomach tightened, and I felt an almost overwhelming urge to run. I can't describe it clearly. It wasn't a noise or a sight or anything specific, just this sudden, sharp sense of danger, like something had shifted in the air, and now we were no longer safe. I didn't say anything at first. I didn't want to scare Sarah, and besides, I wasn't even sure what I was feeling. But the sense of threat grew stronger, pressing down on me. My hands felt clammy. My chest was tight. Then I glanced at Sarah and saw she was looking right at me. Without needing to ask, I could see it all over her face. She felt it too. Her eyes were wide, her face pale in the firelight. Without exchanging a word, we both stood up, trying to act calm. We began walking toward the car, moving casually, as if we weren't in a rush. But about halfway there, we both broke into a full run. I don't remember making the decision. It was like something primal took over. Our bodies knew before our minds did. Run. We reached the car, yanked the doors open, jumped inside, and locked the doors. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for the keys and turned on the headlights. The beams cut across the trees, lighting up the empty clearing. We sat there, breathing hard, staring straight ahead. Neither of us dared look around. I had a small pistol in the car, something I always kept just in case. I gripped it in my lap, but holding it only made me feel more helpless. Whatever was out there, and I was sure now that something was out there, it wasn't something I could handle with a gun. Time slowed down. We sat there for what felt like forever, though it was probably just a few minutes. I kept thinking, don't look to the side, don't turn your head. I had this horrible feeling that if I looked out the window, I'd see something that would break my mind. Then, just as suddenly as it came, the feeling lifted. It was like a pressure being released. My chest loosened, the hairs on my arms settled, the cold weight on my shoulders lifted. I could breathe again. I could think. A few minutes later, the truck headlights swept into the clearing. Kim and the ranger were back. laughing about something, completely unaware of what had just happened. We didn't tell them much at first. We just laughed it off, shook our heads, acted like we were being silly. But inside, I knew. I had never been that scared in my life. Even now, decades later, I still don't know what it was. Maybe it was a predator, some big cat moving through the area. Maybe it was a group of people we never saw watching from the trees. Maybe it was just the deep, ancient part of my brain picking up on something my senses couldn't. Whatever it was, I know one thing for sure: we were in real danger that night. Not because of ghosts or monsters or anything supernatural, but because the wild is bigger than us, older than us, and sometimes it reminds you, without a word, how small you really are. And when it does, all you can do is run. I wasn't a big believer in strange theories. Not really. I'm the kind of person who needs to see things, to feel things, before I take them seriously. So, when I first heard people talk about infrasound, I thought it was just another half-baked idea, like the hum people claim to hear in remote towns, or those stories about hidden government experiments. But over time, the idea stuck in the back of my mind. Low-frequency sound waves below human hearing that can make you feel uneasy, anxious, even scared, without you knowing why. It sounded interesting, sure, but I didn't think it was real, at least not in any way that mattered to me. That was before I took the camping trip I'll never forget. I was 31 then, working long weeks in a city office, sitting under fluorescent lights, staring at screens, drinking too much coffee. I'd grown up spending time outdoors. My family camped and hiked a lot, but over the years I'd gotten away from it. Work piled up, life got busy, and before I knew it, I was one of those people who spent entire weekends indoors. One Saturday, I decided I needed to get away. Not a casual walk in the park, not a quick day hike. I wanted something real, something that would pull me out of my usual patterns. So I packed up my old camping gear, bought some trail food and a fresh canister of stove fuel, and drove 3 hours north to a state wilderness area I hadn't visited in years. It was early autumn, the kind of season where the air was crisp but not yet cold, the leaves just starting to turn. I left early in the morning, driving through a long stretch of empty roads, winding through small towns and forested hills, until I finally reached the trailhead. There were only 2 cars in the lot when I arrived. That was perfect. I wasn't looking to socialize or hang out around a busy campground. I wanted space, quiet. I shouldered my pack, locked the car, and set off down the trail. The hike in was about 6 miles. It was a well-maintained trail, packed dirt, occasional wooden footbridges over small streams, old blazes on the trees. I took my time, stopping every now and then to drink water or check the map, but mostly just enjoying the rhythm of walking. My boots crunched on fallen leaves, the sun flickered through the trees, and the cool breeze smelled faintly of pine and earth. I saw signs of wildlife, deer tracks, small burrows, a hawk circling overhead, but no people. That was fine by me. By mid-afternoon, I reached the small backcountry site I'd marked on my map. It wasn't anything official, just a flat area near a small stream, with enough space to pitch a tent and build a fire. I dropped my pack, stretched, and set to work setting up camp. I moved through the familiar steps, clearing the ground, staking the tent, laying out my sleeping bag and pad, gathering deadwood for later. Once everything was in place, I sat on a fallen log and made a late lunch. Instant noodles on the small camp stove, a few granola bars, some dried fruit. Afterward, I walked down to the stream, crouched by the edge, and let the cold water run over my fingers. The sun hung low in the sky, slanting golden light through the trees. Felt good to be out there. That night, after building a small campfire and eating a simple dinner, I lay back on my sleeping pad and looked up through the trees. The stars were sharp and clear, scattered across the dark sky. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire, the occasional rustle of small animals, the whisper of the wind. I remember thinking how quiet it was, almost too quiet. It's hard to explain if you haven't been out in the woods alone. There's a kind of silence you can only hear when you're away from everything human. No traffic, no humming power lines, no distant voices. Just the deep, empty stillness of nature. For some people, it's peaceful. For others, it can feel heavy. That night, lying there, I started to feel the heaviness. It wasn't anything dramatic at first, just a sense that the air had changed, like the quiet had shifted somehow, deepened. I sat up, listening. I could hear the fire, the faint gurgle of the stream. Nothing unusual, but a tightness was creeping into my chest, a faint tension pulling at my nerves. I told myself it was just nerves, just the natural unease of being alone in the dark. I poured some water on the fire, watched the embers hiss and dim, and crawled into my tent. I zipped up the door, crawled into my bag, and closed my eyes. That was when things got strange. Couldn't sleep. I don't mean I was just restless or uncomfortable. I mean I physically couldn't relax. My heart was racing. My skin was damp with sweat, even though it was a cool night. My stomach clenched tight, like I was bracing for something. But there was nothing. No sound. No movement. Nothing at all. I lay there for what felt like hours, staring at the dark ceiling of the tent, feeling the pounding of my pulse in my ears. My breath came in short, shallow gasps. My muscles twitched and jumped. It was pure, unshakable dread. The worst part was, there was no reason for it. I wasn't hearing anything. I wasn't seeing anything. I wasn't even imagining anything specific. It was just there. A crushing, inexplicable wave of fear rolling over me, pinning me down. I felt scared before. I've been in situations where there was real danger, where something bad could happen. But this was different. This was like my body had decided to panic, even though my mind couldn't figure out why. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to slow my breathing. I thought maybe it was a panic attack, maybe just nerves from being alone, maybe something simple and explainable. But no matter what I told myself, the feeling didn't fade. If anything, it got worse. At some point, I became aware of a strange sensation. Not a sound, exactly, but a pressure. It was like the air itself was vibrating, pressing against me, humming just below the edge of hearing. My chest felt tight, my teeth buzzed faintly, and a deep ache pulsed at the base of my skull. That was when I remembered the stories I'd heard, the theories about infrasound, low-frequency sound waves, below the range of human hearing, that can trigger feelings of anxiety, dread, even nausea. They've been blamed for haunted houses, strange wilderness experiences, unexplained feelings of fear. Some scientists think certain natural events, like wind moving over rocks or underground shifts, can generate these frequencies. Lying there in the tent, shaking and sweating, I wondered if that was what was happening. Maybe there was some natural source nearby, a rock formation, a hidden cave, something that was generating low-frequency vibrations. Maybe that was why I felt like I was being crushed under a wave of invisible fear. But knowing that didn't make it stop. I finally unzipped the tent, stumbled out into the dark, and stood trembling in the cold air. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped my flashlight. I swept the beam across the trees, the ground, the stream, nothing. No movement, no sounds. Just the stillness of the woods. And yet the pressure remained. I felt like I was standing inside a giant speaker, like the very ground was pulsing with something I couldn't hear. My vision blurred at the edges, my stomach heaved, and a deep, primal urge took over. I had to leave. I don't remember packing up. I don't remember pulling down the tent or shoving things into my pack. I just remember stumbling down the trail, flashlight beam shaking, breath ragged in my throat. I walked for hours, pushing through exhaustion, driven by sheer animal panic. Every step was a fight against the crushing sense of dread pressing in on me. When I finally reached the trailhead, the sky was just starting to lighten. I practically threw myself into the car, slammed the doors, and sat there shaking, hands clenched on the steering wheel. And just like that, the pressure was gone. The tightness in my chest eased. My head cleared. The buzzing in my teeth faded. It was like stepping out of a storm. I sat there for a long time, trying to steady my breathing, trying to make sense of what had happened. But there was no simple explanation, no obvious cause. I'd felt something out there, something real, something physical, that I couldn't see or hear, but that shook me to my core. In the days that followed, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it had been a natural source of infrasound, Maybe it had been something in my own body, a panic response, a stress reaction, a coincidence of nerves and environment. But the memory stayed with me. Not just the fear, but the pressure. That sense of being crushed by something I couldn't hear, couldn't fight, couldn't escape. I still go hiking sometimes. I still camp. But I've never gone back to that place. Because whatever was there, whatever was pressing in on me that night, wasn't just in my head. It was in the air, in the ground, in the space itself. And I'm not eager to feel it again.